This week, you should really just patch things. I'll make a great case for that. The NVD backlog, Android phones with malware pre-installed. How convenient. Keyloggers and creepy pharmacists snooping on federal workers. Someone stole your browser history. NSA director has been fired. The deputy director of NSA also fired. CrushFTP, the saga continues. Only steal the valid credit cards. Another post that vanished from the internet. Hiding in NVRAM, protecting the Linux kernel. You down with MCP? More EOL IoT and other acronyms, more bypassing kernel protections, I suppose. When you're ready for a pen test, when are you ready for a pen test, a red team, and a bug bounty? What EDR is really missing. And based on this story, you should just patch everything all the time because apparently that was so important. I put it in there twice. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Deploying enterprise AI, tools like Copilot from Microsoft 365 and Glean are prone to oversharing and data leakage. They lack the in-depth access controls required to ensure that query responses align with users' need to know boundaries. Without proper access controls, these tools accelerate the discovery of improperly secured sensitive files within the organization's M365 environment. Gnostic enables enterprises to safely adopt AI through setting need-to-know based access controls. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gnostic and see how Gnostic can help stop AI oversharing. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 869, being recorded on Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Happy to be here. Sorry I missed last week, but I was in Omaha, Nebraska at KernelCon.
KernelCon. I was almost going to call it CornCon. Is there still a
CornCon is Iowa. KernelCon is Nebraska.
Okay, gotcha.
And the weirdest thing
I get those confused.
Can you tell the difference?
When I landed at the airport in Omaha and drove to the hotel, we, for about 15 seconds, drove through Iowa.
Right.
I don't understand it. I still haven't looked it up on a map, but I've been to Iowa and Nebraska in the last week.
Nice. Sweet. Mr. Lee Neely is here.
It's good to be here. Couldn't be here last week because I was doing my Boise ISSA con, and we were having a good time. We were missing you guys while we were doing that.
Who was your keynote this year?
Well, this guy you may have heard of, Larry Pesci.
Larry.
And then I managed to get also rope in Jay Beal, as well as Eric Cooperswaite.
Oh, sweet.
So it was a fun time.
Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Well, hello. I was here last week, I think, wasn't I? Yeah, I was.
I think you were, yes.
Yeah, we were missing a lot of hosts.
They're all a blur. Yeah, they're all a blur.
Well, I mean, after 19 years, how many years is it for you? 35, 72?
19 years, an average of 19 drinks per episode. You know, it gets blurry.
Mr.
Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
Couple of quick announcements before we dig into it. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd through the 6th. You can hear 250 plus expert speakers and connect with 3,000 plus identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. You can take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% using the code IDV25-SecurityWeekly at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. Also happening that week, I will be speaking at RVASec on using Linux as your desktop. And I think everyone is probably already upset at the organizers for accepting that talk because now you have to hear me talk about giving the talk and have me give the talk.
When's the conference over? I mean, when's the conference again?
Yeah. Not soon enough, right? Another quick announcement. Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly and one of my dear friends, will be running a panel cast with Fastly, titled Security Without Speed Bumps Using WAF Simulator to Transform DevSecOps Workflows. Join him for this exciting webcast on April 16th. Register at securityweekly.com/WAF, which again is where we like to keep our WAF sometimes. I don't know. You can figure it out.
Hey, one more quickie announcement, if I may.
I saw that. It was in like really big text in the...
I don't know why it came through that. That was a
I thought you did that on purpose, but...
I did not do that on purpose. No, not related to that. I usually put in the speaking appearances, but this weekend is B-Sides Charm. That's Baltimore for people outside of Charm City. Our keynote will be the esteemed Harry Coker Jr., recently retired or exited U.S. Cyber Director. And Danny Akaki and myself are going to get up on stage together and give a talk on how to survive getting fired in InfoSec.
Jesus Christ, the two of you together, it's going to be
I can't believe I'm missing Charm. I'm missing Charm this year.
Yeah, same here.
I want
to see that.
All that. Yeah, I want to see all of that. It sounds
That's
amazing.
a really important topic. A lot of people have that problem.
Harry is a cigar smoker, by the way, Paul, and so I'm checking the weather report, hoping we can sit out.
I tried buying a ticket
cigar
and
time Friday night.
There's not many tickets available, but I have to be up at my sister's for Passover, so I can't go. So I'm very frustrated. But
yeah, my schedule just didn't allow for it this year. But I'm already plotting for next year. I've already planned
lame excuses only
for next year. That's
right.
We do have lame excuses. I suppose we should start. Well, I mean, there are more people being fired. Jeff, do you want to go there first? Let's go there first. Let's talk about people getting fired.
People or the director of my alma mater, NSA?
Well, I'm assuming that they were a person. They are a person. They are a person, I should say.
They're a very special person. They have a title. And they have
a hell of a lot of clearance.
Well, hold on. Director of the National Security Agency is the official title? Is that the official title, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the official title. They're also the head of the Central Security Service, the CSS, which was true when I was there. And for the love of God, I don't know what that is.
Is that Cyber Command? Is that the same as
and
Cyber
U.S.
Command?
Cyber? It's different from the U.S. Cyber Command.
Okay.
He was also the head of U.S. Cyber Command.
U.S. Cyber Command's military, as I understand it, and the IC in the military is different. Yeah.
Well, sure. Historically, the director of the National Security Agency, which employs both civilian and military. Well, I guess they don't employ military staff; they're just assigned there. But the director has always been a military, 4-star, usually. So high-ranking officer. They rotate the forces. I was there for 10 years. I served under 4 different directors, and they're neutral. The deputy directors are the ones that tend to be civilians that stay forever and have long careers, and the director position's more of a figurehead, like many CEO positions. And I know we're okay to swear on this show, but I couldn't convey to you adequately with words the shock and horror of people that are on this email list of retired former NSA information assurance employees. We don't understand what the heck is going on with somebody summarily firing the director of NSA, and then find out. And I don't know if this is true or not, but supposedly he got visited by a conspiracy theorist that talked him into you got to let these people go, and claiming it's a loyalty issue.
Oh, interesting.
The director of NSA, like most, if not all people in the military, they're swearing an allegiance to the Constitution, not an office, not a person.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, some of that could be politics, and I don't pretend to be as close to it as many are. But in movies and TV shows, you see the politics come into play. I'm assuming in the real world, there's also politics, especially in the U.S. government and military, for sure.
Of course,
definitely. It sounds like by your account,
but
Jeff,
these roles are typically politics neutral.
Yes, typically.
They're just
right?
there to protect the country and defend the Constitution. And so
That's what's
politics
somewhat
shouldn't
concerning.
play
Yeah,
a role.
I agree. And that's what's somewhat concerning to me is it sounds like politics played a role.
Right.
Someone wanted that person out to either put someone in, or that person was blocking some agenda that someone wanted, and so they got them. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that's in the corporate world. In the corporate world, it happens that way. Movies and TV shows happens that way, right?
Right.
Like, so
Well, to quote the second half of a very famous quote by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, all you've done today is weaken a country.
Yeah. Because do we have new? So the also fired was so the NSA director was General Tim Haw,
right?
How,
I think. But
How? Thank you. The
or
civilian,
maybe Haig. I don't know. I've never
could
heard
be.
it pronounced.
Yeah. It could be also. I'm sorry, civilian deputy at the NSA, Wendy Noble, and that's what you're saying. Wendy was the deputy director of the NSA,
right?
Who would normally step in in the absence of
a
director
who would,
of
has been there for years, and she would be the steady,
keep the ship afloat,
day-to-day operations, keeping things afloat while the new director comes in. I mean, the new guy had only been in place for about a year or 14 months or something like that. One of the things I heard was he got fired because he was appointed by the previous administration. And then I heard, no, it's because somebody talked to someone's, I feel like we shouldn't even use the person's name. 47, I think that's what he is.
47, that's correct.
And said,
47
some sort of conspiracy theory. This guy's out to get you. This guy's not loyal to you. And so that's why you get just summarily fired.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to, I mean, I've got friends that still work there, and I was going to DM them and ask. And then I thought, they probably can't answer anyway. Probably raise flags. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But I will see them this weekend at B-Sides Charm, and I will certainly ask them.
There you go.
That one that you're not going to be there for something.
So can we continue
Thanks
with
for rubbing in, Jeff.
With another story in the similar vein?
Please.
I don't know if it's on the list. I just found it literally about a half an hour ago, but the Krebs story.
Right.
Did anybody pull that up as a story?
I don't think we pulled it up.
What was the Krebs story?
So there's
just came out an executive order.
An executive order that said, Chris Krebs?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Chris Krebs.
Yeah.
Not Krebs on security. Krebs.
Not Krebs on security.
Okay.
My apologies.
Chris Krebs just put out on something.
Well, there's a White House executive order that says that Chris Krebs is to be all security clearances revoked. Anybody that's ever dealt with Chris Krebs is having their security clearance revoked, including everybody at Sentinel-1.
Wow.
Sentinel-1 is used in a lot of places that have government contracts. That's going to cause a big problem. And they're going to go back, I think it's 6 years, to see if he's done anything wrong.
Sounds like a witch hunt, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, no, he says what he did wrong. What he did wrong was say that Biden won the 2020 election. Mm-hmm. It's right there in the order. And that's what I expected all along. You cannot say that Biden won the 2020 election, or you will be blackballed as having lied and pushed false facts.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a significant blow to Sentinel-1.
Yeah.
And
particularly the lack of clearances, because
seemingly, I mean, not even seemingly, innocent bystanders, right? Mm-hmm. Just you work with someone, and because someone has an axe to grind with someone you work with, everybody suffers, including the company.
Yeah.
Does not sit well with me.
So we probably shouldn't say on air that Biden won the 2020 election, because that might get us blocked from YouTube or something. Let's not say that.
Last time I read the
definitely
Second
don't
Amendment,
say that.
Last time I read the Second Amendment.
No, the Second Amendment is where you get to shoot somebody, but they still for saying it. But actually, we should probably go to.
It was like a Freudian slip.
In the same vein, we should probably go to the story number 1, which is just more of the same. I mean, Elon Musk's Doge is using AI to snoop on federal communications, including the Teams chats at the EPA, and they're using AI to scan to see if you are bad-mouthing Musk or Doge or Trump, so they can presumably fire you for disloyalty. So this is just like the Big Brother stuff that you see in science fiction, dystopian science fiction, and like in China where you have a social value score and you're being monitored every moment to raise it or lower it like a credit rating. This is the modern Republican version of small government.
Different types of monitoring. As a federal employee, as an employee of a corporation, university, there is an expectation, which should be communicated very well within the organization, what type of monitoring will take place, and at least at a high level, how that data is handled, how it's protected, where the limitations are. When I worked for the university, I had many conversations, ongoing conversations, made sure I had essentially permission to do the monitoring. I would report in at any time and explain how the monitoring works, show examples that I wasn't there to spy on people's communications. I had to tell them, quite frankly, at least a couple of times, I'm not interested in people's personal business. I'm here to keep the university safe. In order to do that, I have to do this level of monitoring. Right. The way this article is written is not what I was doing or experiencing at the university. This is snooping on communications for a different purpose, which, again, does not sit well with me.
Right. Loyalty checks done by AI are antithetical to America as a
the AI component is interesting as well, Josh.
Well, one thing I would say is this is logical because another Trump executive order that just came out stripped the security clearance of Miles Taylor, who was part of the resistance in his first term and published a book under a pseudonym full of like the dirt about Trump. So from his first term, remember, there was a huge resistance of people undermining what he tried to do. So it does make sense that now that he's back in, their primary focus is to sort of purge the disloyal people in the government who might dare to oppose his actions. It is somewhat understandable.
I did it before we were heavy and hot and heavy on this AI LLM thing. When AI was in that context, I could speak about it in different waves. The first wave of AI was machine learning, and everyone was trying to use the AI and ML buzzwords. Yeah. Now it's generative AI and LLMs. But so back in the olden AI days, which aren't even really the olden AI days, just the previous wave.
Yeah.
I briefed with a company that using AI technologies would monitor chat communications across your enterprise and provide statistics. Now, it was creepy, but the statistics they were gathering were employee wellness, employee happiness related. They would look at chat communications between developers. Are your developers happy? And not necessarily provide all the details in the transcripts. I believe those were available. And again, like I hate like snooping on people like that, but having AI analyze that and go, like, are my employees happy? Are they going to leave or whatever, to kind of give you a gauge as to what's happening in your company? That I thought was novel and new. Again, I still had the red flag of like a creepy factor. But
Another thing is the Snowden revelations. Remember when Snowden leaked out all that stuff? After that, everyone started worrying about the insider threats, and you had to do something like give your employees polygraphs or something. So having some kind of AI monitor their chat to try to decide who is disgruntled and disloyal seems like a product people would pay for.
Correct.
Well,
seems like it anyway.
The weird thing to me is, I mean, this is not really what that is expected, but every single one of those government computers say there are no expectation of privacy.
Yeah,
and so
use of this device is consent to monitor.
Right. So if you're talking smack about the about the management, and then they find it and get mad at you, that's your own damn fault. If you're using the system that says there's no privacy. I mean, I don't agree with what they're doing, but the people can't say, "Oh my God, I didn't know they could monitor me." No, come on, you click on it every day that says we can monitor you. So, if you're going to do it, be smart enough to not do it on a work resource.
You should use Signal.
Well, they're getting they're getting crap for using Signal, but they're falling. But that's not. That's because doing official work on Signal that's considered a record. It has to be stored in the National Archives per the Records Retention Act. That's law. That's what the beef is there. Same thing with creating private Google Docs. They're working in official capacities outside the federal records.
Not acceptable.
That's not okay. Using a Signal as a private act is allowed, but you have to copy everything into the federal record. And that, well, let's just leave that phrase. It's not entirely accurate, but it's close enough.
Sure.
The thing is, there are ways to do it right and there are ways to do it wrong, and they don't feel like they're doing it right. But I mean, in the name of efficiency, yeah. Isn't there a PCI article we could move to?
ThreatLocker implements a least privilege approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits and ensures protection for your organization 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit security.weekly.com/ThreatLocker.
Seriously, we need to get off this topic.
Let's talk about CVE for a
Oh
moment.
yeah, that'd be cool.
We love
the deferring.
We love when we talk about vulnerabilities on the show. There's a lot of CVEs to talk about, a lot of vulnerabilities to talk about that don't get CVEs. We'll maybe segue into that a little bit, but CVE 2025-22457 is particularly interesting for several reasons. This was, you got to start from the beginning on this one.
Yeah.
Sort of. I guess I'll start in the middle. Avanti miscalculated, if you will, the severity rating, stating initially the vulnerability is a buffer overflow with characters limited to periods and numbers. I believe it was a filter for an IP address. Maybe not. I guess, it was periods and numbers. It was, I believe, for an IP address. It was evaluated and determined not to be exploitable as remote code execution, didn't meet the requirements of denial of service. Avanti, in February, identified that as a bug, not a vulnerability. And forgive my usage of terms. Let's just kind of go with where your gut takes bug versus vulnerability. No security impact would be the bug. But again, we'll mince words. But anyway, but they patched it as a bug, not a vulnerability. So no CVE was issued. Because Avanti says this isn't a vulnerability, it's a bug. And that it was included in a February 2025 patch.
I'm finding it very hard to move past that right away to keep talking, Paul.
The bug and vulnerability. I know, because a vulnerability is a bug with security impact. They deemed it not to have security implications. I know there's better terminology for that. Impact, security impacts. Anyway.
Okay.
So
you know what I'm getting at.
Low risk.
So
you know what I'm getting
moving on.
Yep. Moving on.
So since the release of the patch, now this is just speculation based on what was published by Mandy and others, that threat actors reverse engineered the patch and discovered a way to reliably exploit the vulnerability.
Of
now,
course.
Take the reliably with a grain of salt. I have not seen the exploit. I don't know how reliable
consistently
it is.
Regularly.
More
They
often
they
than
were
randomly?
observed exploiting the vulnerability and putting malware on systems. That was then discovered by Mandiant, and Google's Mandiant produced a blog post with all the indicators of compromise, or IOCs, as we like to say. So then, when Avanti found out that, I guess that was a vulnerability, they issued CVE 2025-22457 to address the vulnerability with like a criticality of whatever that carries, 9.8, 9.9, something like that. The article I linked to in my story number 16 is Watchtower Labs' analysis of it, if you want some of the technical details. To my knowledge, up to this point, that is the best resource for the technical details behind this vulnerability, as Watchtower Labs performed the same steps as the threat actors and did the diff of the previous version that had the bug or vulnerability and the patched version. It was interesting what they found. They said it was actually really hard because there was a lot of changes between those two versions in where they believed the code to be in the web binary, which is common on IoT embedded type systems, have a binary called web that does your web server communications. And they did that patch diffing, but there was a lot of changes in there. They're like, they determined that someone had gone through and like cleaned up a bunch of code, which produces a lot of differences between those two versions of the binary, which makes it harder to figure out, well, which one of those changes actually fixed this thing that we now know is a vulnerability. And they got it down to the being able to access the buffer that could be overflowed, essentially, I believe is the way it worked, in the X forwarded for HTTP header.
Okay.
So this is a great example. Some may argue this is the exception, not the rule. Largely, you wouldn't be wrong. But this situation supports the notion I've been pushing for a long time that you just need to patch.
Yeah.
Just patch.
Just patch.
You
It's
don't-
not that simple, man. I've
But
got to
you
like.
don't have. But
It's
here's the
hard.
thing, Josh. You don't have a crystal ball, and you can't know if something will be exploited in the future or how it will be exploited in the future. There are standards such as EPSS that attempt to do that. Albeit, I don't think that really would have helped. This wouldn't have helped you in
Yeah.
that case because it wasn't even identified as a vulnerability. That was the big, like, aha moment for me. You know, what you need really is great systems administration. Apply a system, a process, an effort, and resources.
Everybody has that,
to apply
Paul.
them.
They run Qualys, they run Nessus, they run,
Still not going to help you in this
Rapid7.
situation.
but that's the process that everybody has.
Right. The process
how
is
many-
wrong. The process is wrong and broken.
And how many times is the patch defective and crashes your stuff or makes it not work?
Well, that's the operational risk
So
side
that's
of the
when you're
patching.
supposed to have a test lab where you test it before you install it. But who
That-
does
that's
that
where I-
anymore?
That's what I covered with my word process. Well, it's not my word. I used
But-
that word. I should
Well,
say.
you know, if we're going to have a general discussion on CVEs, I've got an article too that I thought would raise the shackles on your neck. But for this article, the vendor got to decide whether there was a CVE issue
Jeff,
or not.
if you have shackles on your neck, I can get a grinder.
Okay.
If you have hackles, that would make more sense.
Hackles, is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, hackles.
Sorry,
But Jeff,
it was
but Jeff, you
it was a malapropism.
Jeff, you asked a great question. It was the vendor that made the determination whether or not this was a bug that didn't have security impacts versus one that did.
Well, the article
And-
says they didn't think it was exploitable.
Correct.
So
Correct. That's where I kind of question in my mind.
what's
like,
wrong with that in and of itself? There's a vulnerability discovered, and the vendor gets to choose whether there's a CVE issue.
I believe there are skill sets involved that vary in terms of determining how exploitable a vulnerability is. And I'm not confident that every vendor on the planet employs folks that have that finely tuned of a skill set to make that decision.
Stop.
That's
Are
part
you
of my
saying
concern.
that it's subjective?
No, not what I'm saying.
It's skill.
I'm saying you
objective.
could miscategorize bugs versus vulnerabilities based on the level of skill set of the people at your organization to make
Well,
that
or it could be
determination.
bias,
It's a skill set,
or
It's
it
a
could
skill
be
set.
political
It could be bias.
pressure.
It could be
There's
bias
other
too.
things.
I
There's
agree.
other environmental factors at play.
It's one of those, like, it's why you don't audit your own code for bugs, because you want to believe that your code is great and it doesn't have bugs. That's
Mhm.
existed since I started programming when I was 7 years old.
Absolutely.
I very quickly learned that other people looking at my code could spot bugs better than I could because I had tunnel vision and I had preconceived
Mhm.
notions of, like, I wrote this and it should be good. I wrote
Forest
it so
for
it
the
would
trees.
work. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So,
Exactly. So there is that, but there's also a skill set thing to evaluate a vulnerability and determine its level of exploitability. This requires someone who has experience writing exploits. And I just don't believe that all the software vendors on the planet employ people with that particular skill set at a high enough level.
Or
Make
if
that
it's an
determination.
independent third party, and I think this is part of what you're
Sure.
talking about in other stories with the
Mm-hmm.
what's the term they use, deferred for older CVEs.
Correct.
There's not enough time in the day for anybody to run down all the vulnerabilities that are being discovered and published. But to defer to the
Correct.
vendor just seems
Well,
like
I
a
was-
conflict of interest.
I was thinking that's because they've got all these CVE numbering authorities now, where they've got like all these entities reporting and creating CVEs, and I'm wondering if, in fact, Avani is one of them. And
Well,
so
the
they would
CNA
be-
program in and of itself speaks to deferrability. Is deferrability a word?
Sure, it is now.
It is now. The deferrability of the responsibility of defining the impact for a vulnerability or the CVSS score or the affected systems, products, software. Essentially, a CNA is the outsourcing of that definition and enrichment of CVE records.
So guess who the
Back to the vendor.
Guess who the CNA is for Avanti products, supported infrastructure, and everything but third-party components?
It would be Avanti.
Yes, it
is
is
the CNA. Yeah,
So,
Avanti is the CNA.
Does that feel like
Correct.
the fox watching the hen house? I mean,
The incentives are very much backwards. I agree. I wrote an article, I think last year, about the backwards incentives in this process. I agree. I guess what I'm picking more on now is, but more of what I'm picking on now in pulling on the thread of, I don't think we have the right skill sets. They're looking at things with the right people and the right lenses to make some of these decisions. Maybe it should be outsourced, but none of that's going to be perfect. And my real point is none of it's going to be perfect, which means when patches come out, you got to start applying them because you just don't know what is going to be exploited. And the only reason we found this, further evidence, the only reason we know about this, a bug that became a vulnerability that was exploited, is because someone was compromised, and I believe someone was compromised. Mandiant was the first responder. They analyzed it and said, there's an exploit for this vulnerability. Had that not happened, we would all still be blissfully ignorant to the fact that threat actors are exploiting a vulnerability that we didn't know about. We can debate whether that's a 0-day or not.
So to make sure I'm following this correctly,
it bends the definition of 0-day in my mind because the vendor did know about it. They did patch it. They just didn't know, or they didn't classify it as something that was exploitable.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm trying to understand. So Avanti did issue a patch.
Yes.
Correct.
But the patch was not tied to a CVE.
Correct. So because they believed it was not a vulnerability.
Yeah. Well,
Can we say that?
They did not think it was exploitable. That's the language that's used in the article. So from a PCI perspective, and I think this practice is modeled by a lot of companies, they only install and this goes to the concept of prioritization. They only install the patches for the critical security vulnerabilities. If there's nothing telling them that there's a critical security vulnerability, they're not going to install the patch, even if they're just putting it off for some amount of time until they get to it. So I think your statement is valid, patch everything, but in practice, it's very impractical because you have to prioritize.
I get that.
You have to.
I get that.
Right.
And
I guess I'm trying to
most companies aren't even going to know that patch is out there, is what I'm saying. So you could tell them to patch till the cows come home. They don't know that this is a patch that they should install.
Well, I take it one step further, Jeff. Even if you got the adroit admin who knows that there's a patch here, he doesn't necessarily have the backing to take down the VPN and for an outage window because it doesn't have a marked vulnerability that hits the threshold. So he or she's got to work harder to get that permission. Because I think when it comes to like any of these boundary devices, you should be patching as you know, like a hawk. But if you don't have the management support to do it, are they going to fall on their sword? Because I think, Paul, both of you guys are right. We need to do it. But
you made two great points there, Lee. One, that without a critical security vulnerability, it's going to be tough for me to convince the rest of my team and organization that we need to do this. Right? The second thing is the edge device, I think, really needs to factor in. So yes, I'm saying you need to patch everything, but especially things that are internet facing, such as your VPN concentrators. Start there in terms of adopting a very, very fast patch cycle. The other advantage to that is typically vulnerabilities are found in software that is a previous version behind, perhaps. I think you increase your odds of less exposures if you're on the latest version of software that's adopted the new security model that has code that's undergone more security audits. You're less likely.
That's a very different paradigm from how we started out in this business.
Someone could present data and call it complete bunk, and I welcome that. But my gut feeling is, in general, being on the latest version means perhaps less attack surface.
Yeah,
because
that makes sense.
right, the latest version, we cleaned up this code, we implemented this security feature, we re-architected this, we structured the authentication and authorization in a much better way, right? So
Let's be honest, being on the latest version reduces your personal liability when your boss comes screaming because there was a breach or whatever. Boss, we're on the latest version. There's nothing more I can do.
right.
Well,
If it's a
you're
0
gonna-
day, it's a 0 day.
Well, if you're
happens.
going to ask for some data, there is some data. In my story 3, the Sophos adversary report says that the most popular way that people get in is by stealing credentials 41% of the time, exploiting vulnerabilities is only 22%, and brute force is 21%. So you could argue that the effort you spend patching is wasted unless you've already spent a lot more effort improving your authentication.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
I agree. I don't. If I had to choose, absolutely, authentication is huge.
Yeah.
But also, when you've got, especially internet-facing devices, attackers are going after them, and one of the things they're after are credentials. You go back to the several different attacks in the past several years against VPN concentrators, edge devices. One of the main targets for attackers are, can I use it to collect credentials? And they have, because your VPN is tied to your whatever authentication you're using, typically Microsoft Windows environment, and therefore they're using it to leverage credentials.
mm-hmm.
So,
And VPN is just a fancy acronym for router.
Yep.
With a little magic wiffle dust sprinkled on it.
With some encryption and authentication thrown in
theory.
But I get to charge extra for that extra little thing on the label.
Right?
No, you're right, Jeff. I mean, it's another form of router and should fall in that category. And credential management, I mean, that was one of the interesting points Jay made in his keynote, is that it's still credential theft, choosing bad credentials, et cetera, that whole, it's still a thing, and it's boring, it's mundane, but damn it, we get that wrong. Use a password manager, use multi-factor. An interesting thing is now a lot of the password managers will tell you when a stored password's been in a compromise or breach. But I'm wondering how many people actually look for that, aside from somebody like us.
The fact that we're at that level to do that level of detection means it supports the notion that attackers are after credentials and credential abuse.
We're only able to do that because of AI.
Well, that too.
Tongue in cheek.
Talking previous wave AI or current wave AI, Jeff? Or all-encompassing AI?
Let me ask the AI real quick. Current. No future.
Did you just do the magic AI 8-ball?
I did. Hey, there's some tchotchkes we have to come up with. The AI 8-ball.
Come on, like attribution dice. There's some of my favorite tchotchkes out there, The AI 8-ball.
I prefer the jump to conclusions, Matt.
I like that one, actually. Every once in a while, somebody comes out with some amazing tchotchkes and swag. It's so cool. My wife, actually, what's really funny, it's totally off topic, but my wife this morning is, oh my God, what is
the
that?
Speaker gift for KernelCon. The theme was race condition. This is a fully functional miniature racing helmet.
Fully functional for a small monkey.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to put their head in it, but maybe my Cabbage Patch dog.
Don't make that comment. Anyway,
more CVE talk. Otherwise, I'm going to start talking PCI.
Yeah. So I don't know if you read Jericho's latest post, which I didn't. I thought I added to the show notes, but I didn't.
I did see it.
Jericho was virtually attending. What's it called? The conference,
the VolnCon or something like that.
VolnCon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Virtually attending VolnCon. The big takeaway there was presenters were talking about EPSS, and they were talking about which vulnerabilities get CVEs and which ones don't, and got that wrong. And this is something I've poked at for quite several years now. I think Jericho collectively lost his shit. But Jericho's right.
He's allowed to do that, by the way.
He's right. And the presenter is wrong in the way that they described the situation of what gets a CVE, what should get a CVE, like only critical vulnerability. The most critical ones definitely get a CVE. and most vulnerabilities do get it. Like none of that is true. There are CVE vulnerabilities that get a CVE identifier are but a subset of all of the vulnerabilities and or exposures or techniques that are out there in the wild that could be used, that are being used by attackers today. And this is like Paul, 10-year-old research figured this out. And I was like, yeah, this is CVE is just
You figured this out when you were
subset.
10 years old?
No, 10 years ago, Paul.
Oh,
10
10
years
years
ago,
ago, Paul.
not 10-year-old Paul. No.
Okay.
10 years ago, yeah, when I figured this out. And Jericho brought up several examples, and I also have several examples from just even in the past year or two experiences. We as Eclipsium reported a vulnerability to Zixil. We wrote a blog about it, and it didn't get a CVE as
Wait.
one example.
Oh, that's right. I remember you talking about that. It was
If
yeah,
it doesn't get a
couple months
CVE,
ago?
it doesn't count.
right.
It's not a
because
vulnerability. That's
like,
what we were just talking about.
basically, if we make it simple, version 1 had this software that implemented some features, a particular feature set. Version 2, they just removed that functionality altogether and said, our customer should just update. There's no need for a CVE because the software that has the vulnerability doesn't exist in our product anymore. And I'm like, but you put out software, you distributed software that had the vulnerability, that has a version number attached to it, and it is definitely a vulnerability. Therefore, in my mind, it should get CVE so we can track it. I talked about this when it happened. And that's just one example of what happens out there. Jericho provided many other examples, and I'm sure all of us could come up with examples. Sam, you were commenting at the top of the show all the different techniques and highly technical articles that I discovered this week. Not all of those have a CVE.
No, I mean, like I was saying, a lot of them don't have an executive summary where they say exactly what is the
that too.
problem and how do you fix it. And they need that.
They need that. That would help everyone, including the author of that.
Yeah.
Rather than just being some esoteric thing that people go, good Lord, I don't understand. I don't understand that. It doesn't have a CVE, therefore I'm going to ignore it. That's dangerous. It's a dangerous way to approach things.
Now, everybody should include that at the start of whatever they're writing. What did you find and why do I care?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. It was Sands that taught me that well over 20 years ago now. Good Lord, I'm getting old, but I am old, I guess. But they would structure content such that you got to explain the about. And they were like, you can't leave it out. You need some of the about. And the about was, why do people care? What is this thing? Who uses it? Why do they use it? Type questions is how I've structured. That's how I structure in my mind because it's been so ingrained into my own process. And then the rest of the content should be the how in the nitty gritty details.
Right.
And so even 10% of the about and 90% of the how, because they're like, if you go in either direction, you're going to lose the audience. If you just jump right into the technical, you might lose people. But if you spend too much time talking about the about and the how, I think we kind of have an example about the people get caught up on that in their marketing. I have one of my stories. I'm going to make sure we covered it now, right? And people get lost, and there's a balance there.
Mm-hmm. I remember a statement from like 20 years ago where they said a web page, you have like 7 seconds to get through to the user, or they're going to click and go to another web page. Mm-hmm. And I think that's only reasonable. You need to have like 2 sentences at the start that people can read to say, do I want to bother reading the rest of this or not? It's only reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Even just starting with this software or component or technology is made by this company for this purpose, and it's sold to these folks or organizations, and this is how they use it. That it just that in a couple of sentences would be so. Otherwise, I'm going to like Google and LLMs, and I'm like, what is this thing, and who uses it, and why do they use it? Because then I can think about what the potential implications are. Now I can go back and go, okay, now tell me how it can be exploited or abused. Mm-hmm. And otherwise my ADD brain goes to, I can't get over that first part, and I can't consume the rest of the content.
Now, I think the Microsoft security bulletins show an excellent example of how to do this with a good executive summary at the top.
Yeah, Watchtower Labs has their own approach to it. That was my article number 16 that I had in there. And they do get to that eventually, but it's very funny and witty, and there's a lot of memes and very personable language, and that is engaging. And they will at the top explain it. Well, I think they did a CMS. I think they did a 2-part series on a CMS. And they did towards the top of the article, they're like, by the way, this is who makes the software. This is why people use it. Here's how many people use it. Here's who uses it. And this is why it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, thank you for that. That's amazing.
So you're asking the company that's going to decide whether a CVE is even issued or not, you're expecting them to provide clarity in terms of an explanation.
The incentives are backwards. Again, that's my last year article. The incentives on the surface definitely are backwards. In practice, incentives definitely get in the way. Jeff, I think you got the saga continues with CrushFTP. You got a few more. The article you linked to is actually really good at explaining some of what happened there. I think
it was
your
really
story
good,
number one.
and it was, to me, it was still confusing. I was hoping you could unwind it because you're much more entrenched in this thing. But what I got was, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was 2 different organizations that discovered a vulnerability. They both fired for CVE, and one got rescinded and the other one got pushed forward, but I wasn't quite sure why.
Well, so when I read this article, Jeff, it seemed that Outpost 24 is credited with responsibly disclosing the flaw.
I read
to
that
the vendor.
part, but the article's about, I forget the company.
Vulncheck filed the CVE.
Okay.
Because one had not been filed. Likely, and I'm not sure if this is true. I love the Vulncheck people. Patrick has been on the show before. It's a great guy. They just closed the funding round. They do great work. But Vulncheck is the one that filed for the CVE, likely not knowing that Outpost 24 had been credited with it and was disclosing that, and had requested a CVE number, according to the article from MITRE, on March 13th, 2025, was coordinating with CrushFTP to ensure that fixes were rolled out in a 90-day disclosure period.
But it was another company, and I mean, I got to this article from another article, and maybe that's my problem. But some other company, and I forget who it was doing a demo or something and saw the vulnerability being exploited like live, and so they
Huntress?
Was it Huntress? Yeah,
Huntress.
That's right.
Huntress recreated a proof of concept and said it observed it in the wild on April 3rd.
That's right.
2025.
Okay.
So that happens at well. So I guess I'm not throwing shade.
I'm not throwing shade. I don't know. It seems very confusing because it seems like all these different organizations were trying to do the right thing, and it's confusing and it's
stepped
complicated.
on each other. Yeah. I like to think that everyone had the best intentions here. There was some evidence that we covered, I believe, last week, where CrushFTP CEO was sending nastygrams. But look, vulnerability disclosure can go sideways and get ugly really fast. With a drop of a hat, things can just go sideways. It's one of the most delicate processes. I'm thankful for people like Michael Santarcangelo and others. I was thinking about, I saw a picture of him came up my Google Home, and the lessons on communication are so important, because the way I apply that in my day job is I help Eclipsium today with vulnerability disclosure in the process. And once you get into the disclosure process, it's way more about communication and interacting with people than it is about the technical details. Because the technical details are the technical details. Yeah. Kind of hard to dispute facts and details and bits and bytes. But where things can go one way or the other and sideways and down a windy path is that communication with other people. And this is like a perfect storm where you've got someone who discovered the vulnerability, is in a disclosure process, someone else who saw this in the wild, so now the cat's out of the bag, and then someone else that maybe saw it and said, well, there should be a CVE because cat's out of the bag, circumvented the 90-day. That's a messy process, and we hope that these don't end up like this, but sometimes it does. And sometimes the only thing it helps is if all the stakeholders get together in the same room and sort it out. And oftentimes that's difficult, or people don't want to do it.
So I have to ask Paul: is the Avanti CVE, has that been recorded in the Kev yet?
I believe it has.
I think it has. Yeah, it should have been.
It has.
Okay.
99% sure it has. I mean, short of actually looking.
Because the Kev is, we've really actually seen this exploited in the wild.
Someone has seen it exploited in the wild.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Which again, from a prioritization
the
perspective,
Avanti
is important.
The Avanti is
to
in
somebody.
the Kev. CVE 2025 22457.
Yep, that's the one.
Due date 411.
13159, 13160, 13161. They've got
They got a few in there. They got a few in there.
They've got a higher.
That's perhaps a topic maybe for another time.
Yeah.
But
Hank, yeah, right there. I mean, that first one you listed is right after the CrushFTP entry.
Is it right after the CrushFTP one?
Yeah.
Huh.
And that, but the top two right now are Linux kernel issues. But the interesting thing to me is that we're still seeing these file transfer processes getting tipped. And I'm trying to think.
Right.
Hello. I mean, I know we need it for ETL, particularly with
file transfer is trivial.
Yes. But I'm like, guys, you should be checking out if you're doing it right, because like they keep getting tipped. You could be your service could be next. And I'm actually surprised that people haven't moved to things like your cloud drives and stuff to do this instead. But
because they've solved the problem, or it's somebody else's problem?
Because it's not broken yet.
You could just send everything through Signal.
That would be awesome. Well, actually, I do remember a guy who said, look, I don't trust their trials answer, so we're going to encrypt the data we put there and give them a way to decrypt it on the far end in case the middle gets tipped, which at the time I thought was silly, but it's like, that was pretty shrewd, actually. And mind you, the time being like 20 years ago.
Was that Phil Zimmerman?
It was a guy I worked with. It was it was part of the feed for the payroll file.
Yeah, I did that at my company 25 years ago or so. They were sending unencrypted email attachments, and I was the guy that said we should be using Microsoft Office encryption.
Yeah, this one it was transfer the file to a server using whatever, and he just made
I think I've told this. I'm sorry, Lee. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think I've told this story before, but I do a lot of talking at various places, and I did a continuing
street corners, men's washrooms, at rest stops.
I just write things in those places. Be quiet.
Yeah, you should.
For a good time, call Jeff.
I've gotten a few of those calls.
Oh, what can I say? I'm here to get you dates. Okay. So, I like your wife, so I'm trying to get you dates. So, better off. Like she could do so much better. No, I'm just kidding, Jeff. I love you. Your wife is amazing. However, she really is amazing. So, in all seriousness, I was doing a continuing legal education in Philadelphia, and this company comes up, and we're doing it about HIPAA. And this company was like, "Oh, can we ask you a question?" Whatever. Like, we're doing medical messaging, ephemeral medical messaging. Like, okay, that's cool. That's very cool. This was at the beginning. This is years ago, at the beginning of the ephemeral, signal and everything. And like, do we have to worry about HIPAA? I went, wait, but you're doing medical. Are you sending patient records, medical files and data with my name and social security and condition and diagnosis and prognosis and treatment? And like, oh yeah, all of that. I'm like, no, you don't have to worry about it. I mean, they're just going to shut you down about 10 minutes from now, but that's all. And he went, oh, so you mean, I'm like, yes, I was being sarcastic. You need to worry about it. They legitimately had no idea.
But they were asking because they weren't using a computer?
No. They were using,
or
they were asking because they were using a computer. They were building a system. This was a startup. They were building a system for encrypted ephemeral medical messaging, but they'd never actually looked at the HIPAA protocols. That's like somebody building in your world, building a point of sale system and going, we're going to hook into Visa, and they never touch PCI.
Happens all the time. Oh. Don't get me started.
How many times have you seen that, Jeff? I'm honestly curious.
more times than I'd care to count. The more common variation is, from an e-commerce perspective, the trick is to use an iframe.
Yeah.
So that all the credit card collection is being done by a third party. Most people think, oh, we don't have to do PCI because we don't touch the data. It's done over there. And that's
No,
not true.
you're never mind.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, that
Yeah.
art.
There isn't enough
Oh, wait,
brown
so
liquor
do
in
we
my
wanna-
office right now.
Do we want to go to the PCI related story?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
do
if
it.
Now
you're
I have
talking
to-
about the Stripe one, absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
Which story is
I
that?
added this one. I added this one pretty much just for you, Jeff.
It had my name written all over it.
It did.
It's very
My
triggering.
story number.
Thank you.
My story number 25. I found the actual article, original research, if you will. The title is Stripe API Skimming Campaign, Additional Victims and Insights. It's from a company called J Scrambler.
Mhm.
Not sure how many folks have heard of a company called J Scrambler. I recognize them immediately. I'm like, years ago, I met with them, I think at Black Hat in the Innovation Sand. Do they call it not the Innovation Sandbox? That's RSA. Whatever Black Hat's, whatever Black Hat's equivalent to the startups.
Right.
Startups can qualify to exhibit at RSA
Yeah.
one time only, and they were there.
Mhm.
And I met with them, and I was impressed with the talent and their product. Essentially, they make software that allows you to analyze and protect your web applications a la JavaScript. So,
Well,
analyze
not just your web applications, but the
other people's too,
but
right?
the browser experience for the consumer.
Yes.
That part of the because
Everything
that's
that lives in
technically
JavaScript.
different from the web application, but yeah, JavaScript.
Everything that lives in your browser that's JavaScript, they were able to provide software that helps you analyze that. improve
Disclosure
the
or
security.
disclaimer, but my day job, we're sort of a we partner with J Scrambler,
Oh, okay.
not in any kind of official capacity, but I did a webinar with them. I think I've done 2 webinars with them.
Oh, okay. So
Most
you are
recently
familiar.
a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago. This is very triggering, but I want to hear your description of what they're describing being found before I comment.
So I read this article, and here's what it came down to for me, is that there is malicious JavaScript that was implanted on a website that accepts payments,
Mm-hmm.
and they theorized that it was vulnerable WordPress plugin kind of thing that allowed the attacker to put their own JavaScript into that web application.
Yep.
And the JavaScript overlays the official Stripe iframe that would collect the consumer's credit card information. So rather than entering it into Stripe,
Mm-hmm.
they use JavaScript to overlay something that looked just like that. It kind of reminded me of clickjacking, right? They
I mean, it's more
overlaid-
like it's a man in the middle attack. It's a hijack.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
The consumer is typing in the data, and it does end up going to Stripe, and
Eventually,
they
yes.
complete their transaction. But there's a few steps along the way.
In between, the attackers are able to collect the payment card information. And what I thought was interesting, Jeff, was they didn't just collect everything that was coming through the site. They actually used the Stripe API.
That was
to
a very clever
Right.
enhancement.
So they first validated the credit card using the Stripe API. And if it's a valid credit card, they would collect it. If not, they would just throw it away. They'd be like, I don't want that. But they didn't validate it themselves. I think it said in the article, like, they could use the dark web and other things to validate all the credit card. But, like, why bother when you could just use Stripe's
No,
API
they
to
just
validate
use
it?
Stripe's
Already-
API.
Yeah, you're
It's
already
very-
into their
Steal
stuff.
it
So
and
why
use
not?
it. That's beautiful.
But this is where I want to get Jeff's take on this too, is that there was an update at the top of this article that it was kind of misconstrued that this was a Stripe issue or problem or vulnerability or incident. And my take on that is, I think it's difficult for Stripe to identify this type of fraud. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's difficult for Stripe to identify this type of fraud. Therefore, we're absolving Stripe from this incident. But Jeff, I think you maybe have a different opinion.
Well, it's not that it's a different opinion, but settle in, guys. This is going to take a few minutes. When version 4 of the PCI standard came out, the first draft came out in 2020, became official 2024, the council added some requirements to prevent these types of attacks.
Mhm.
They're more commonly referred to as a web skimming attack.
Yeah.
And that nomenclature is based on a pretty common practice for card payment devices to add skimmers, especially at like a gas station pump or an ATM,
The
where
physical
a
manifestation of the
physical
attack we just talked
skimmer.
about.
So the card goes in and it's being read as it's being fed into the legitimate device that's reading it. Same
Mhm.
kind of concept. These types of attacks have been around for 7 or 8 or 9 years. They're often referred to as mage card attacks
Mhm.
because one of the APTs that likes to do these attacks is called Magento. So mage card is some variation on
Mhm.
Magento. And this has been this has been a clusterfuck for the PCI standard for the
I bet.
last 3-4 months since version 4 came out. Traditionally, e-commerce merchants, people that have websites, if they're using a third party like Stripe, and
Mhm.
just all they do is embed an iframe with somewhere in their web page, and the iframe is what's collecting the data, they're basically not seeing the card data. It's over at the third party. And if they qualify for that, basically all they have to do is validate, yeah, we're using a PCI compliant third party, in this case Stripe. We're going to use Stripe as an example because this is the article.
Mhm.
What the new requirement said is on your, and this is where it started to get fuzzy very quickly and confusing. The council wanted to say, we need to look at all the JavaScript that's being loaded in your customer's website from your web pages, even up to and right before the iframes kick in. They didn't really come up with good terminology for that, but they've now landed on either the parent page or the prepayment page. But
Mhm.
their language initially said the payment page, which a lot of people inferred, that's what's being launched by the actual iframes, therefore I don't have to do it. That's on Stripe.
Mhm.
But the nature of the attacks is they're attacking the JavaScript and compromising the JavaScripts that show up on the parent page or the prepayment page, the place where the iframes are embedded,
Mhm.
because nobody's looking at that.
Right.
And that's where there's been mass exploitation. I
Mhm.
chuckled when I saw this article. Stripe is notorious in particular. I'm going to pick on them a little bit, because for all of their merchants, these e-commerce merchants that just use their iframe, the vast majority of them, they say, you don't even have to bother doing PCI. You're good. Don't even think about it. And that was one part of what became problematic, because they also added the external vulnerability scanning requirement in SAQA in version 4. And so people are like, well, what do we need to scan? We don't do anything. We don't even touch credit card data. It's all over there. Well, they want the prepayment, the parent page scanned. They wanted, and this was put into SAQA in version 4, they wanted you to do an inventory of all the JavaScript, make sure that they're verified, validated, and you had something checking to make sure they hadn't been compromised. Not only that, but any headers that get generated in the processing your web page. They wanted to have something put in place that was going to flag or alert if somebody's tampering with the parent page.
Mhm.
So yes, the update on this is accurately not Stripe's problem, because it's the prepayment page, it's the parent page.
Right.
However, January, the council issued a new version of SAQA and they ripped out these requirements. They said it's been too complicated figuring out what to do with this stuff. So we took these requirements out, but they added an eligibility requirement to be able to use SAQA. Not only is it you're outsourcing using an iframe to a third-party payment processor, but you also are validating that you're not susceptible to these types of web skimming attacks that the numbers for these requirements are 643 and 1161. You have to validate that you're not susceptible. Of course, that blew everything up. Companies
that's
like
screwed up, man.
It's completely screwed up.
Okay, it's not just me. Like
it's not just you.
Okay.
For the last 2 years at the PCI annual meeting, they call it the community meeting. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 companies were showing up. JScrambler being one of them, saying we've got stuff that can meet this requirement. And they actually knew what they were talking about. It was so revolutionary and refreshing that here's people that know what they're talking about, and they actually understand there's a PCI requirement that they address, they can help you with, and they can talk to it. There is never in the 20-year history of PCI that I can recall, one or two companies that would show up and say, yeah, we do this for you, yet alone 4, 5, or 6. And then all of a sudden they got the rug pulled out of them because for all these SAQA merchants, which by the way, that's the vast majority of retailers and merchants out there that have to do PCI. All of a sudden they didn't have it as a requirement anymore, but kind of sort of they did, but it's now more up to these companies to sell it, except for if you're a merchant and you're just doing SAQA, which I think it was a guy from JScrambler defined it, it's kind of a paper pushing exercise. There were no technical controls in SAQA formerly, and now there are. Oh, wait, now they're not. So it's been a huge debacle. What's interesting, though, is that this article came out. It's interesting that Stripe's saying, not us, it's you. But if you're a small merchant and all you're in the habit of doing is contracting with somebody like Stripe or some other payment processor, you don't know anything about PCI. You don't know anything about the requirements. You don't know that there's an SAQA until Stripe or whoever tells you to. And a lot of them don't. They say, don't even bother. We got you covered. So it's interesting that Stripe is taking that tact because part of the eligibility requirement, well, put it this way. So they issued a new SAQA, ripped these requirements out, and then like days later, they issued an FAQ to explain it because everybody was scratching their head. How is this going to work? And then just 2 weeks ago, maybe, all this became effective April 1st, by the way. So right before April 1st, the council issued a guidance document. The guidance document on how to meet 643, which is the requirement to do something about the JavaScript and inventory them and justify them and make sure that they're being checked to make sure they're valid. The guidance document is 38 pages long for one single stinking little PCI requirement. What? I've been living this shit for the last 3 months because I've done webinars with JScrambler, another company called Human Security. I actually spoke at the PCI meeting last fall.
That's Michael Tiffany's company, Human Security.
With somebody from Human Security talking about these two requirements.
There was another one that sponsored our show that did very similar stuff, and I don't remember who that was either.
I mean, there's a handful of companies that focus on this, and they're now in contrast. I'm not picking on Gurkhan, but I was at Gurkhan last fall, right after the PCI meeting, and there was a lot of vendors, a lot of sharp people, a lot of people we know, a lot of companies that we respect, pen testing companies, and so on and so forth. And I was just walking around to all the pen testing companies and companies that are providing defenses, and I asked them, "What do you do to protect against mage card attack?" None of them knew what that was.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, web skimming." Then some of them knew what I was talking about. The contrast, I don't have an answer for it. It's just an observation. But the fact that in our hacker community, our security community, where there's so many smart people, they seem to be oblivious to this type of attack, even the pen testing companies. And yet there was this handful of companies that were on top of this, JScrambler included, that were ready to go and had something that could be done to meet the requirement. So it's still a requirement if you're a big guy, big merchant, but not so much if you're a little merchant, except for you have to validate that, you have to assert that you're not vulnerable to these types of attacks. But
well, you should have to assert that your website doesn't have vulnerabilities that allow attackers to modify your website to insert the web skimmer.
You should, But
Right.
where I was happy when version 4 came out, the council was finally putting requirements in that made people actually look at the website and do some security to the website. Like, who's pen testing your website? Who's doing a web application pen test of your website? Nobody was having it done because, well, I have an iframe. I don't have to do any of that. It used to drive me bonkers. So I was really happy that they had these requirements that finally put the focus where, at least in part, where it should be. You can't just dismiss your website. Another quick anecdote, and I'll shut up. I had a client in the last couple of weeks, similar situation. They're a company that provides this web-based application to a bunch of other people. Therefore, they're a service provider, which means they're not eligible to do the short form SAQA. They got to answer to all the requirements, but they're like, well, we don't transmit, process, or store credit card. We get the iframe from somebody else, and so we don't have to do any of this stuff. And I had these big, long, drawn-out arguments with them over, well, no, you still have to answer to all these other requirements, like hardening your network and systems and making sure you're doing encrypted communication protocols and secure software development and testing and all these kind of things. Yeah, just the stuff that PCI requires. And their claim was, all we do is software, and it's in the cloud. And so we don't have to do systems because we don't manage any systems, and we don't have to do any networks because we don't manage any networks. And I'm like, pretty sure your application's running on a system that's running on a network. It may not be them responsible for it, but it's certainly the purview of the cloud provider to provide that form. So it doesn't make the requirement not applicable. It applies, even though they might have a third party like the cloud provider providing the protection and meeting the requirement. I'll shut up now, but I need to get more bourbon.
That was very, very insightful.
This has been my life for the last 6 months.
How do you really feel,
these
Jeff?
two requirements?
You deserve some bourbon after that.
Yes.
Talk about something a little different. Keyloggers and a creepy pharmacist.
Yeah.
Two of you have this story.
Not
this week.
cool.
Not cool
You think?
at all.
Well, I know who else had it. I know I did.
This is like the call it like script kiddie malware. I forget what we used to call it back in the day, but it's basically that
You and Sam Lee.
Swiss Army knife of malware.
Yeah.
They can access the webcam. It can do key logging.
Yeah.
It can give you remote access.
You mean
I
like
forget what we used
good
to
old
call
back
it.
orifice?
Yeah, it was yes, it was back orifice, and then there was something after back orifice.
VO2K.
And then there's something. It's gone through multiple iterations of like what the latest thing is. I think I saw an Instagram short clip of someone showing it. I'm like, but you're just showing the script kiddie malware that you installed. Like, there's nothing new or novel about that. It's been again. VO2K is great example.
So the killer to me was that, I mean, this guy has been doing this for a decade, but why wasn't his backdoor being caught by
I mean, you can do this with a interpreter like Metasploit module to enable the webcam but not have the light come on.
Right, and that's what he was doing. He was webcam without the light come on. There was one of the claims the
keystroke,
couple was at home having sex and it was videoed.
There's
there
a
was
lot of free porn out there. It's not like
No,
Dear God.
And so this person decided to at the hospital.
It was at
wherever his employment was.
Right.
clinic
decided to put this.
at a hospital.
Yeah, he installed keyloggers, and my impression was he probably used commercial keyloggers because there's commercial spy software that will not be triggered by your endpoint detection.
Yeah.
He's in
Stalker
Howard County. Holy crap, he's in Howard County.
Yeah.
That where you are?
Oh, that's in Maryland.
That's really close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff, how close is that to you?
Is that the guy that did it is not accused of a crime, but the women are suing the hospital for not notifying them. So that part is sort of hard to understand.
I think
University of Maryland Medical Center.
Yeah, I'm thinking what they're trying to say is that the University of Maryland Medical Center didn't do their due diligence against malware and malicious software. I mean, I think
that's going to be a hard case to win because they're not required to.
Well, Yeah, that's true.
Period.
So
That's an issue. I know that's true.
Period.
We had this discussion years ago at my school, and if students use a public computer, they use it at their own risk.
right, and that's was one of my reactions is they're stealing personal banking information and other stuff. I mean, catching the credentials for the university is one thing, but they were catching other stuff. So they're using a shared computer for personal activities, and
Yeah.
what could
I do
possibly
not,
go
this is,
wrong?
I tell my wife not to do this.
Yeah.
My wife
Ooh.
works in a medical environment at hospital.
Yeah.
And when you work in a hospital, pretty much all the computers you use are shared computers.
Mhm.
Unless you work in IT
By more
or-
people than you usually intend, but that's a
yeah,
different
or
story.
you're a secretary. I mean, you might have your own computer because that's where you sit all day.
Yeah.
But most other people that work at a hospital
Mhm.
that are taking care of patients use shared computers because they're
Right.
traveling from room to room. They're moving
Mhm.
patient from here to there.
Yeah.
They're going from exam room to exam room. In a large hospital, in my wife's role, she doesn't have like her own room where she's doing scans of patients all the time. Like sometimes she's in the ER, sometimes she's in the breast imaging center, sometimes she's like wherever. And so they're always using shared computers. I was told her, I'm like, don't ever use a work computer for anything personal.
Mhm.
Right.
Because for a lot of reasons. I'm like, one is all those computers are monitored. And like,
Mhm.
two, if someone's going to see you doing that, or if the credentials get cached or whatever, someone could pick up on that, right? I'm like, so just it's like not logging into your Netflix account when you go to the hotel, right?
Yeah, right.
Kind of a similar kind of thing. It's interesting that there was a malicious insider that was taking advantage of the fact that you're at work and you need to log into something to go pay your bill, which happens. I mean, life happens, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
at my lunch hour. I need access to a computer. I got to pay this bill because it's due. So I got to go log on really quick and just go do this. And this person was preying upon that, capturing the keystrokes to get the people's personal bank information, which is just really crummy. I mean, granted, you shouldn't be logging into your bank from a shared computing environment in a
Mhm.
medical setting for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But this is heinous. But also, I'm reading. I think it's Lee's description of this that the keystroke logging was one thing, but the malicious software was recording the cameras and disabling the camera light, but also got people who were undressing.
Yeah.
And I'm just confused as to how in a shared computing environment
Yeah,
you're also naked.
Yeah, that's where I
I
actually
think
was
he-
kind of
yeah.
going, what?
No, I
That's
think he
kinda
infected
weird.
their home computers also.
But-
Okay, that makes. I mean,
that's what's
that's
my first
awful,
conclusion,
but it makes more sense.
I was kind of going, how? I mean,
Mhm.
Well, if you put stuff on
Don't
flash
you watch
drives that they
Grey's
took home,
Anatomy?
Well,
I
that
don't
too.
understand
Yeah,
the
I mean,
question.
that's.
plus
I
they
hope that's just
also
in TV shows.
a lot of people do their charting from home. I don't know if he could have infected their login script or something.
or else they had an UMMC computer at home. I thought maybe that was what it was because there was,
Thumb drives are
yeah, I mean,
one way.
the couple
Could
talk
be.
about being recorded in their intimate moment in their house. I'm like, why have you got a computer and a camera? Never mind. But that was, yeah. I was trying to, but I mean, this guy was kind of like a loose cannon. I'm just like surprised it took a decade to catch him, allegedly catch him. But you're right. You use the right software, it's going to fly under the radar. And they say they replaced all the infected computers and they've added detectors for that kind of behavior in the future. I hope the hell they have, because that's
If
not
I
a
can
good-
rebound a little bit, I mean, it's
Yeah.
sort of a similar analogy back to the Stripe story, because Stripe had a disclaimer that Jay Scrambler had to add that said, this was not any of Stripe's systems or Stripe's API. But then I was thinking, except for, shouldn't they have reasonably had something in place to detect the abuse of the API where they were, checking to see if the card was valid? But then I thought, but no, that's legitimate
Right.
use of the API.
Mhm.
But, Stripe very clearly doesn't want to have anybody coming after them. But it's a similar type of scenario. It goes to, I remember in the early days, 30-ish years ago, when people were first plugging into the internet, nobody wanted to be secure. They just wanted to be as secure as the next guy, their competition, so that they could claim that they were doing security best practices, because there was no legislation or regulatory requirement for the vast majority of companies plugging onto the internet to have any kind of measurable bar of security. And to this day, there still isn't, frankly, other than, pockets of certain industries.
Sam, I think it was you that had a story on Android phones with malware pre-installed.
Yeah.
Would
This
that
is
be like
interesting.
Android
Number
TV
five.
set-top
Preface,
boxes?
just to preface
Yeah.
this, it's interesting because we've talked at length about the Android TV type boxes that have this, and one could easily make the leap to phones that do this, but I had not seen too much evidence that this has been happening, so that's why this piqued my interest.
Yeah, well, I think it's in Russia mainly, but yeah, they sell Android phones at reduced prices, and they have malware on them. It's a pretty brilliant scam, a supply chain attack, you could call it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, for
it
sure.
reminds me of that Israeli military attack where they sold the guys pagers that had bombs in them.
Yeah. Well, I'd say this is another form of subsidizing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
And,
what
you
it
know,
is in the
so-
Android. I mean, we speculate that's what it is in the Android TV thing. And to your point, Sam, about this being an attack that to the attacker's advantage is wildly successful, we still really don't know. That's what when we covered the last round of Android TV things, it doesn't surprise me that it's happening on phones because we haven't been able to really trace it back to where the malware is coming from. Everything I read about Android TV devices, we could just never trace it back to these people in this group in this country using this method to get it somewhere in the supply chain. We have not
Yeah.
locked down what I would call the cheap Android, or I should say inexpensive Android device supply chain.
Yeah, well,
Which is
that's
scary.
what I'd say is this is just a small step forward from the normal business model where people sell you TVs and phones and they report all sorts of data on you back to the company legally,
Correct.
which they sell, which is part of their profit model. So why not just put more spyware on the phone? And
Mhm.
I bet if you put it in the terms of service, it might even be legal.
Well,
You
one could say
consent to-
Microsoft and Apple are doing the similar kinds of thing in their terms of service. We were
Yeah.
able to collect
There's-
this data. It's in the terms of service.
Yeah.
That's right. So I mean, the difference between this and the legal ones is these guys didn't hire enough lawyers, I think.
It's a grim way of looking at our privacy.
How'd they?
What might remain of our privacy today.
They just needed to add a piece of paper that says, I agree to have this spyware on the phone in return for a reduced price. Anyway.
Who knows? They may have.
Yeah.
So it looks
Somebody
like
drank my half-filled cup of water.
one sentence that's in here that's got me wondering and thinking about Paul. That says the Trojan penetrates smartphone firmware before the phone reaches users. No, this is embedded in their firmware.
Well, yeah. If you're a smart attacker, you get in on the firmware aspect of it. So even
It affects
if
every process. Yeah.
it affects every process, so
Right,
if
and
you put
even
your
if you-
malware in the Android kernel and or in an Android application of some kind, one could potentially clean that off, especially if you have Android root, ADB root, Android debugger root on the device. You can clean some of that stuff up. However, if it's inside the bootloader or the firmware, much harder. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much harder because now I, as the consumer, I need that level of access, and that's my day job, right? That's
Yeah,
literally.
where it's at in terms of if I want to maintain, have stealth and persistence and a greatest impact on the system, I want to get it as deep and as low level as possible. So
Well,
therefore,
yeah.
it doesn't matter what people do to the device. You can reset the factory
Yeah.
reset the phone, but the malware is still there because it's
Mhm.
embedded in one of the firmware subsystems.
This is like the Sony rootkit.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, if you have that, if you're making the phone, you have an opportunity to really embed that malware in where it's not coming out.
Yeah. The
Certainly.
Hey, if we're talking about
it is
smartphones,
awful, but it's awful that they're preying upon the inexpensive Android devices to do it. Or
Well, I
was
mean, those are the
taking
easiest ones
advantage
to
of-
get at. The expensive ones,
Yeah.
look, this is why when people ask me what IoT devices should I buy, I say name brand ones. They're more expensive,
Yeah.
but they're more inclined to actually they're more inclined
Yes.
to patch them, keep them up to date, keep the firmware proper, build in enough memory so they can update their freaking firmware.
Hopefully have some supply chain security.
Oh my
You
God,
get what you
supply
pay
chain
for.
security. And
Well,
and so I tell people buy the Nest, buy the Ring, the whatever, because it's a better shot of getting a vaguely secure, longer term product.
Right.
And they have more to lose. They have reputation to defend. Whereas these
Exactly.
no-name cheap things can just change to a different no-name.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
they do all the time. They're
yeah,
they're branded and rebranded a million times over.
You'll notice there's on the cheap ones, there's rarely any name on the actual device. It's on the box. They slap a sticker on the box.
Right. And it's
You know,
interesting.
this happened to me when I went to Layer 1. I went to Layer 1 and rented a car from some no-name place, and it was terrible. So next time I avoided them, and when I went there, it was the same guy that had changed their name.
Yep.
Well, I was saying, and the interesting thing in the article here is the photo with the real Androids in it is a couple of Samsungs, which are not your low priced. These would be
Right.
brand X, as you said, Josh, no name on them, or something you never heard of, that look just like the Samsung, because the idea is it's every bit as good as the one that costs 12 times as much, right? And
Although I assume the price difference is probably not that large. But anyway,
well, I just, that was a number I made up. Could you tell?
Yeah.
So serious, but you're absolutely right, Sam. It's probably, but it's just enough to incentivize people with like, why should I spend that whatever more, particularly when things are expensive already?
Well, yeah, when Android stuff came out, I went and deliberately bought some cheap stuff that did come with security flaws and malware because I wanted to check that out.
Yeah, that's what I do. I buy cheap phones from AliExpress and I see, can I root them? Can I discover malware on them?
Yeah, I was going to tease
because I know it's there. I refuse to use them.
I was going to tease you.
I refuse to use them with any of my account or use them in any capacity.
Yeah,
if I do that, I use some of my older Pixel phones,
right?
Because they come from Google. And while it's not impossible, but it's a much less likely chance that there's malware pre-installed on a Google phone. So when I install my shady DJI apps,
do you run? Hey, Paul, do you run antivirus on your Android phone?
I do not.
I think I haven't used Android in years. I believe you're supposed to run antivirus because there really is a lot of malware, but I just wonder how many people do.
I just don't install shady apps on my primary Android device. I will use like a different Google account to enable the phone so I have access to things like Drive or whatever, and put the shady app on there because DJI is notorious for this. They're like, you can put our Android app on there, but it's not in the Android store. You have to download it from our website and you have to give it permissions to all kinds of things. I'm like, I'm not putting that on my primary phone. I'm like, I'm going to get one of my older Android phones and I'm putting it on that. And that's what I do.
You're trusting the Google store to keep the malware out. It's not very good at that. There's a lot of malware in the Google store.
Well,
right? Which is highly suspect that they don't want to put their app in the Google store.
Well,
I think the Play Store is a little better about, malware and things like that.
And weren't we just talking a couple weeks ago about the Apple Store and how good it is at protecting security?
I think it's much cleaner than the Google Store.
And yet my story number 2 talks about a vulnerability in an iOS app loaded on iPhones that gave up credentials.
Yeah, even though Apple does a great job of protecting their phone ecosystem, the fact that we can still have apps that leak data is still frightening.
And in particular, credentials. And weren't we just saying a little while ago that credentials are still a problem?
But could the store possibly detect this? It sounds like they uploaded the credentials to an insecure cloud storage site. I don't know how the iOS scanners could have found that.
The iOS scanners are super advanced. In fact, I listened to a security cryptography whatever episode. I can't remember the person's name, but you would recognize the name. You probably listened to the episode, Sam. I think you listened to that podcast as well. Yeah. And I want to say he was in a startup that analyzed iOS apps, and Apple bought them and built that technology into the App Store kind of walled garden to
Yeah.
get better at detecting malicious behavior inside of apps.
But tying our whole conversation together, it's sounding a whole lot like these are not the droids you're looking for. Apple's really good at looking for certain things, and there's
Right.
other things that
Correct.
it's not their problem. Stripe is really good with their API, and yet their clients were
Back
still
on Stripe.
compromised.
Back on Stripe.
Well, I'm not picking on Stripe. I'm just saying this is a recurring theme. Here's a problem. Here's an exploit. Well, it's not us. It was something else. It wasn't us.
No, and it wasn't them. I mean, let's be honest. But yeah.
Well, that's always the
but
case.
what
I mean,
do
ecosystem-
people look
yeah.
to? People look to somebody else to tell them that their stuff is secure. And
you know what?
yes,
you're right. We should
technically
do that
accurate.
here. Your stuff is secure. It's
Your
okay,
stuff is
everybody.
secure.
Yeah.
As long as you
But
unplug
what's
it and take the
what's
battery out.
amazing to me is all ecosystems allow the TikTok app. Now, I'm not saying the TikTok
Well,
app is
for another
malicious,
45 days or whatever it is, I forget.
but we've been back and forth on it. And I'm not saying the TikTok app is I don't have evidence that it is malicious in a very specific way. However, it does command a high level of permissions. However, it has passed both Apple and Google's checks for being an approved app in the App Store. Now, either that means that Apple and Google's checks aren't that great, or TikTok's implementation of it is able to get around it, or my guess is the TikTok app pushes the boundaries of like just what flies under the radar to be approved while being the most pervasive spying kind of app that's out there. And I when this first hit years ago, Black Hills Information Security did a full analysis of the TikTok app and was like, yeah, it requests a lot of permissions, but there's nothing malicious or nefarious that's here. It requests permissions like any other app would. It just requests a lot of them, is basically the 20,000 foot view of what it has.
Is there any evidence that it's actually stealing more data than other apps?
Not that I've seen, but again, the last time I saw that, Sam, was several years ago on the Black Hills site. I mean, anyone can go reverse engineer the TikTok. Like, if you're into reverse engineering apps, if you wouldn't mind taking
I'll
a look
ask
at
Jason
the
this
one,
weekend
right?
if they've done any follow-up, because he's going to be a B-sides charm.
Yeah. It would be interesting for Black Hills to do a follow-up on that, because TikTok is still an issue that we're dealing with as a nation, as a technology community. The whole thing, security community, we're all affected by it. It's all in play.
Well, now, it sure looks like TikTok is going to get banned because our level of hostility towards China has gone way up with the tariffs. So I
thought
kind
Oracle,
of doubt,
but I
if
thought
not banned, priced out of the market.
I heard Oracle was going to buy TikTok. I heard Amazon was going to buy TikTok.
Yeah, but I think
I heard a lot of rumors.
I think China's not in the mood to allow that right now because of our great hostility.
They're not selling. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. The political climate does not lend itself to that. Completely agree.
Yeah.
Speaking of Oracle, I had a story about Oracle too.
Yeah, we talked about this one last week, Jeff, but it's
there's
very
more.
much. So is there new? I mean, it very much sounded to me like they swept vulnerabilities under the rug, which is.
This is exactly what his story is about. Go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, I don't know the exact timeline, but they finally owned up to, we were breached, right? The same day that a class action lawsuit was filed against them.
This is my shocked face.
It's been dragging on for weeks. This is a masterclass in how not to do breach disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look,
Oracle's always had a very interesting relationship with the security community, and we can trace the roots back to, was it Larry Ellison that said our software is not hackable or something like that?
Come on, remember Unbreakable?
Unbreakable.
That's it.
That was
the
Larry.
whole thing. And like, look, there's a lot of great people that work for Oracle, and at the end of the day, they make some pretty amazing software that's used by some of the largest companies in the world. However, I get it's just it's their relationship with the security community that just gets kind of like weird. And I think all of us would be okay with Oracle if they were just transparent. I'm like, look, yep, we had breached. I'm like, yep, look, we have vulnerabilities and we're doing our best to fix them. That's all we're asking, really.
Like
at the end of
Microsoft.
the day. like Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft, for as large of a software company as Microsoft is, they're pretty good. They're pretty transparent.
They've done a whole lot
about what they're doing. I mean, do we not agree with some of the things they might be doing or proposing, as evidenced by my latest LinkedIn post? Right?
Can't wait till you can talk about that, Paul.
Some people don't agree, but they're more open about it, and they take, but also they own it, and maybe their incentives aren't 100% aligned, but they own it in the fact that, as I said last week, they'll go find vulnerabilities in other people's software and help make the world a better place. Now they're doing that because they're going to take the blame anyway, but they still do it. So
look, Microsoft has poured a lot of money, time, and effort into getting better at the security world, and I give them a lot of credit.
They've hired a lot of really sharp people. Got there's a lot of really sharp people that have been through the Microsoft ecosystem universe.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, we all said Microsoft, ew, but now it's honestly they've done a lot. But Oracle,
I mean, there's some people that will say use a Linux laptop instead of a Windows laptop.
But I think we're having more constructive conversations about that and being better about explaining why.
Yeah.
And I like to present both sides of that. And when I don't, I go into the 360 plus comments on my LinkedIn posts. I'm like, yeah, I didn't talk about that when I made the post, but the cloud PC that Microsoft is proposing doesn't store your local account or data, connects up to Microsoft's cloud. It's basically a thin client. From a power user perspective, and people who value privacy, we're not on board with that. However, from an enterprise perspective, that could be a great win for security. That could be, I know Secure Boot's always enabled. I know security protections and controls are enabled on that. I know the user doesn't have access to things on the system. It's all stored in the cloud. I get better manageability. I get better security. From an enterprise perspective, that could be a benefit. However,
could be, but that's incidental. That's not why they're doing it.
No, they're doing it probably to collect better telemetry, to be able to. One person said they are requiring a Microsoft account so they can market to you, so they have a hook to you to sell you more things, to know who you are, to go, oh, you're using this product. Now I want you to buy this product. I want to make this product available to you. So it's all, I mean, it's capitalism. Sure. But from an enterprise perspective, we want our users having that freedom versus security is a huge argument, right? Yeah. You want to give users the ability to install whatever they want on their systems and do whatever they want. Yeah, maybe developers and power users might need or want that, but most people are just like, I'm using Office 365, And so why do I need a PC that has all these other things that can be abused by attackers? Let's limit the attack surface for them. I mean, it's basically the Chromebook.
I was going to say, isn't that the Chromebook argument?
It's basically Microsoft, and the Chromebook implements amazing security.
And yeah, and it's got a great life cycle because the footprint on the Chromebook or this thing is going to be minimal compared to what you
So this sounds like a flip question, but it's actually a serious question. So my corporate laptop is Windows 10. Mm-hmm. And Windows 10 goes belly up
for now
in October.
Right.
But we do rely a lot on Office 365. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, if one were to be, from an enterprise perspective, doing everything in the cloud with Office 365 and other things, does it matter what your operating system is on your personal device or your physical
that's the whole
device?
Concept of the Chromebook.
Look. It's one of the things that drove me further into going, I'm just going to run Linux, because more and more was done in the cloud. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to worry about, I need to install all these different applications to get my job done. A lot of them now are hosted in the cloud. Now, there's many exceptions to that, as I'm learning more and more exceptions to that. If you're using the Adobe Creative Suite, you got to run Windows, as an example. Mm-hmm. And so there's still things like that. So again, like I'm calling power users. I probably in my presentation in June need to really define what I mean by power user, right? But I think your point is great, Jeff. Like if most of it's in the cloud, doesn't matter what you're using. And in a lot of cases in the enterprise, using less of a device is better for security.
Right.
Well, and it also better for transferring devices. If you
Yep.
drink the Microsoft Kool-Aid on it's not just Windows, you can do it on Mac too. You configure that your documents and your photos and those standard photos are actually
Everything's stored in the cloud.
already they're symlinks to your OneDrive. So
Yep.
you've got stuff cached on your computer, but realistically, I can take another computer, log into your account, all that stuff synchronizes, and I haven't had to do that rigorous transfer. I mean, you may have to move the profile, but profiles are getting
But from a
normalized,
corporate enterprise perspectively, that makes sense. Where
Well,
I've heard people take issue with that is personally,
yeah.
they said I'm storing all of my documents in Microsoft's cloud, and my subscription ran out, and I had to give them some upgrade fee and some money per month in order to maintain access to my files.
Right.
And that's where I see like a big divide between personal usage and corporate. With corporate usage, okay, fine. Personal usage, like basically they're like, Microsoft's holding my files hostage till I give them money.
Let me further corrupt your model. Here I
Yeah.
am. I have a small business Microsoft Office account. So as long as I have my small business around, I'm going to keep that going. But if I decide to bag OMP, I've got the same problem because I'm using that account to synchronize my Windows and my Mac for that very scenario. On the other hand, my wife's computer, which is the home edition of Windows 11, which comes that way, by the way, default, it wants to do that. It's all hooked up to Microsoft Personal. So if we decide to bag that, in fact, I learned a lot since setting that up. It's going to be a pain in the ass to roll that over to the OMP infrastructure, but I'm not trying to cry a river. That's me being lazy. But it's you can be over a barrel several different ways, and with doing that from a corporate perspective, talking to friends who are in the business of helping people reprovision, their life got so much easier, and you're so much less dependent. So imagine that model with a purpose-built device that just runs Office. In fact, think about you could have your stuff synchronized there and your desktop, and what you travel with is this air quotes disposable, right? If you lose, I mean, there's data cached on it, but it's way less traumatic than losing your laptop.
Well, that's also what I like about using even Google G Suite. I don't have a ton of documents to drag around with me.
Right.
So if I need to reinstall, jump from machine to machine, I can't.
Right. If you're or if you're sitting somewhere with just a browser, you're not SOL.
Yeah, just don't log in at a hospital where some rogue employee has installed a keystroke logger.
Well, if you're lucky, yeah. I mean,
I guess that's a really good argument for multi-factor authentication.
You think?
Yeah, big time.
Part of this is upsetting to an old timer that everything's in the cloud now, because I'd still just as soon not put stuff in the cloud, and I'd rather have it on my personal device.
Jeff, there are several people in your camp too, because they've commented on my posts and said, basically, like, there's something to be said for owning your hardware, for using open source free software that like you don't own, but you have the freedom to modify to your heart's content,
and no
someone else
subscription
can't
fee.
lay claim to that. There's no subscription fee. Someone can't take it away, and so there's something to be said for that. And I think a lot of the things but a lot of things we're talking about with Apple and Microsoft, right, are in contrast to that. And there's a larger population, in my opinion.
You own your data as long as you pay your subscription.
Right.
Yes.
People want to get away from that. Yeah. I want to talk about things that disappear from the internet, because this has happened a few times in the past couple of years. Like I hope this isn't a trend, but I just a little inside baseball. I mean, the hosts on the show know this and largely do this. We look at stories all week long, and we use some type of system to bookmark things, to collect links to articles. I'll give a shout out to Instapaper as one of the services that we use.
Some of us do.
There's a lot of different services out there that allow you to do this. And oftentimes I'll see something, and then by the time it comes to showtime, I'll access that link again and it's gone. That doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened. And my story number 24 was titled "The Threat You Can't Scan For." And it was a Medium article in a GitHub repo. When I checked today, both of those things were gone. Like vanished from the internet. Now, fortunately, my bookmarking service, and most do, will cache a copy of that for you if you save it. Now, I didn't clone the GitHub repo, which I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm going to start making a habit. When I flag GitHub repos, I want to clone them. So I have a copy of them in case they do go away, because that happens.
But clone is just a fancy word for copying.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's the Git language for I copied it to my local machine.
Right. You made your own copy.
So the gist of this one is the author called it Veriduct, is a framework that quietly dismantles the core principle of digital security. So speaking of hooking someone in the first sentence, Sam, okay, this person did a good job of hooking me in. It said that presence is a prerequisite for control. It doesn't hide files, it doesn't encrypt them in place, it doesn't use steganography, obfuscation, or polymorphic payloads. Instead, it shatters files into SHA-256 hashed fragments, each indistinguishable from meaningless noise, stores them independently. There's no metadata, no structure, no discernible pattern. The original data is not encrypted or disguised. It's absent until reassembled by a specific key map. The file's not hidden until it's gone, until you call it back into existence. It's a very Hollywood-style description.
Whoa. How do you call it back into existence?
Again, I am labeling this as a Hollywood description for what happened. But the person backed it up with a GitHub repo, and I'm like, that sounds neat. I should come back to that. But by the time I came back to that, it was gone.
Why didn't you call it back into existence?
One of two things happened here. Either this person had super top secret alien technology, and whoever developed this technology wanted it back, or it's complete bullshit and the person took it down because they got called out. I'm not sure which. So,
I mean, the first scenario goes out right there with Elvis and Daddy just went home.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to those alien autopsy videos from back in the mid-90s?
Or like proof that Sasquatch is real is right up there with Veriduct, potentially.
Sasquatch is real. I see aluminum. I mean,
seriously, I got to go to YouTube.
Rusting iron images everywhere.
So you know that Paul, he's in your world. The guy that built that repository is a microcontroller guy.
Yeah. So I don't I don't know. I haven't researched it any further. Everyone knows as much as I do at this point. I mean, other than I have the rest of the article wasn't very descriptive either. It was more the GitHub repo, which I didn't save.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate they yanked it, but
we may never know.
If only we were live on Discord. I found the UFO or the alien autopsy from 1995. Okay.
So wait a minute. So this
I think I remember that video. That was in a documentary I watched in the 90s.
It says that it shatters files into tiny fragments and then pulls them back with a key map, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's
Isn't that basically how a hard drive works?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Or at least
I was going to say, based on that description, you could probably find some academic papers that talked about a similar model or way of doing that. But I'm like, I don't know. This warrants that much of my time and research right now. I just think it's fascinating that it disappeared from the internet. Now that's the most interesting thing about this whole story: the fact that it disappeared. Now,
how often does Wayback Machine record stuff? I mean, do they?
So Wayback Machine won't archive every GitHub repository.
Gotcha.
So it'll archive like the main page, but it won't archive.
But how often do they do a lap around the internet?
I forget what the frequency is, Jeff. I know this because when key material leaks in someone's GitHub repository and they take it down,
disappears quickly.
it disappears like for good because the archive doesn't back up everyone's GitHub repository. I don't know if it was MSI or Gigabyte or one or both of them. That it was PK fail. That the key was in a GitHub repository, and I was like, I don't know, I want to go get the key because if you have the key, oh boy, you can sign stuff and bypass secure boot, and it's a grandiose day. And I could see the archive of the GitHub repo, but the archive didn't archive all the files within the GitHub repo. So And GitHub is massive. I don't know if there's a
There's a
service
lot of
that-
data out there these days.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's a
Yeah.
service that backs up everything on GitHub. I want to say I read a story that people were trying to do that. In any case, that's
So-
the
Are all of our
Interesting.
Google Drives backed up somewhere?
Sure.
yeah on Google.
Yeah, they're replicated from East Coast to West Coast. Yeah, that's just like a backup.
No, Google Drive is hyper available. It is not hyper secure and hyper stored. It is not a backup. It is simply a single point of failure.
Is that hyperbole?
No, because I lost some Google photos. So I'm pissed. So I did some research. It is hyper available. It is not a backup.
Right. So
You need to, but I think we talked about the cloud PC and everything, right? Like, you also need to have your own backups, local copy, in
Built
addition to cloud.
QNAPs just for that.
So there's one other by the way, there's a third possibility in terms of what happened to this.
I do my
Paul.
own backups. God damn it.
Yeah.
Good boy. And that is, I was reading that description again. It reminded me of another product out there that I don't know where they go. I ran into these guys a few years ago called BitSpray, and it was doing the same sort of thing, taking files, shredding them into signature-based, bunch of little pieces, M out of N pieces needed to recreate the file. But it sounds so much similar to that. I'm wondering if we got you're stepping on my copyright or my patent or whatever the hell.
I agree, Lee. When I read that too, I was like, this sounds like it's been covered in academic papers
Yeah.
before, kind of thing.
So So
I mean,
wonder-
do you do single cut shredding or cross cut shredding?
long as it's
Always
smaller than a grain of
cross-cut.
rice.
Because in the
Always
movies,
cross-cut.
you can reconstruct anything, even the cross cut.
Back from
Yeah,
the
that's
80s,
right.
maybe, not anymore.
Yeah. Have you seen the size of the classified shreds?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the idea
like
is that
sand.
you shred, but you shred and then you use that as kindling for your fire.
Yeah.
And then it's truly destroyed. I did have two stories
for it.
that I thought were not great, but I think we can have potentially great discussions about. One is
and
my
roll.
story number 17. I was disappointed. So the article was pen testing versus red teaming versus bug bounty. And I'm like, all right, you piqued my interest. And then from the first sentence, I'm like, okay, you used an LLM to create this article and just asked it to compare and contrast. And then as I read, I'm like, oh, so you asked an LLM to compare and contrast pen testing, red teaming versus bug bounty, which is disappointing because it comes from NCC Group, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for.
Why?
No, they fired all their good people.
Well, NCC Group produces
Historically, maybe.
fantastic research.
They used to.
Maybe that's changed, but even as of fairly recently, they've been producing fantastic research. Obviously, you have some more inside knowledge than I do, Josh.
They, yeah, they laid off a lot of people. Darth Null.
Are they U.S. or UK? I thought were they UK based or US based?
I don't know. I think they're UK based, but
Yeah, I haven't dug in. I know because I follow they post stuff that goes into hardware and firmware hacking. A lot of research on that, which is one
Yeah.
reason why I follow them.
What's
And again, the research they publish.
the
But anyway,
what's the document that I think Strand contributed and SCOTUS contributed, and it's like
The
the
P-test.
pen testing, the
P-test, pen test.
PTES.
yeah, the pen test
PTES.
execution standard. I'm revising
I
it.
think, Kevin Johnson is helping spearhead that effort. Is that?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
I need
he
to
roped
talk
you
to
into it,
Kevin
yeah.
because I've objected to that thing since the first time I saw it, which wasn't too long ago.
Oh,
Well, so you should
happy
be
to-
involved in the
Yeah,
the
happy to
next
have you
revision.
I
Yeah,
just heard
I
another
would-
person
please,
volunteer, Josh.
Please.
What's that? Yeah,
I heard a volunteer.
I did.
Because my basic premise is, back when we started doing this, over 30 years ago, we didn't make all these weird nuanced distinctions between a pen test and a red team and a blue team and a purple team and a this,
So that's
that,
an
and the
interesting
other.
question. The difference is that actually, so I have the unpublished chart that the P-test guys made to determine the different levels of pen testing. Things like,
Well, my question is, who the fuck do they think they were that they could make these claims and people follow it? That's my
they're
question.
the only ones that did. Did you ever write it up? Because
I never, well, not in an unclassified manner for sharing. No.
okay, so now's your chance. But the point is that they tried to define the different levels based on things like, did you write custom code? Did you Did you use, was it a full scale red team attack, et cetera? And so we realized that that's not applicable anymore, because now we've got a lot of AI. Now we've got a lot of
automation.
Huge
It
amounts
does
of
a lot of
automation.
this for you. Yep.
So and you can actually, so Josh Moore, actually, who's brilliant guy, actually wrote up a definition of pen testing that we're probably going to start off with, which is effectively that a pen test is defined by its attributes and its dimensions. Do you want fully automated? Do you want manual? Do you want it to be a long pen test?
Didn't we have a
short one?
roundtable discussion about this a
did.
few years
Yes.
ago?
But what I want is the flip
It's
side of
taken
that,
me a while
Josh.
to get this
But
together.
I want the flip side of that, which is what is the value to me as the organization?
Well, but that's
Like,
one of the
we
one
can
of the,
define-
the
Well,
dimensions.
was your teaser about when are you ready for a pen test tied to
Yeah.
this article, Paul? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
but
let's talk.
I need to know when I'm ready, when I should use these. I don't want to take away from P-test. It is important to define these things.
I do,
What-
by the way.
what-
Go ahead.
Okay, but if we can define what these various activities are, put labels on them, and define some characteristics of each, that's part of the equation for me. And it's an important part of the equation. Because the next part of the equation is, okay, what's the value to me as the organization? And
Right.
how do I use them? And then the other third piece of the puzzle is how do I know when I'm ready for each of those? What are the things that the characteristics of my organization and security program should exhibit to then go, I want to map that to, I want this type of pen test or this type of exercise. Because
Well,
it's
I'm
another
going
stuff.
to
volunteer.
generalize a little bit here, but most organizations are not ready for a pen test.
No,
they're not.
that's true.
And with
I'd argue they're ready for a certain level of penetration.
well, I mean, we have to
tests
start defining
yeah.
terminology,
Yeah.
which is something I appreciate. Depending on how you define a pen test, and it almost is like we need to define or describe or detail activities, and then decide what bucket it falls under in terms of what do we call this, a pen test, a vulnerability assessment, or
a
something.
red team or whatever.
I mean,
purple team. Yeah.
And I admit I'm biased with the way that the PCI standard kind of flows, but it flows in the way that I logically thought it should flow 20 years ago when the standard was first published, where that a pen test is a live fire test. It's a test of your defenses. How well have you done doing all the other things you need to do to set up a secure environment?
Right.
It's not for the purpose of, and I'm describing attributes instead of defining it, but that's how we usually do this in our business. It's not something you use for the purposes of vulnerability discovery. It
Correct.
might uncover a vulnerability, but that's not the purpose. But that's what most organizations use it for, especially thanks to PCI not defining what a pen test was for so many years. People could run Nmap, people could run Nessus, slap a cover page, call it a pen test, and you were done. The fact that pen test today in version 4 requires you to address or remediate exploitable vulnerabilities or security weaknesses. They added "and security weaknesses" in version 4 because exploitable vulnerabilities wasn't straightforward enough. Partially because very often companies are not really wanting people to do pen tests that actually do the exploitations and knock them over, and God forbid it to be a denial of service attack. So you have to find the vulnerabilities and say, well, if we did exploit this vulnerability, it potentially could lead to this. And then you have all sorts of arguments. And I will admit culpability. When I first came out into the private sector 30 years, I was going around to companies saying, you ought to have us do a pen test. We didn't call it a pen test. We called it a vulnerability assessment. Have us discover all the ways that we can break into your network. And even the ones that wanted a pen test, I would ask them, do you want us to find a way in to your network, or do you want us to find all the ways in? Everybody wanted it all the ways in. I said, okay, that's a vulnerability assessment, not a pen test. Pen test is You put up your defenses and let's see if we can break in. It's modeled after the methodology that's put forth in that obscure hacker movie from 1992 called
Hackers.
Sneakers. Hackers is 1995.
I know.
But I mean, it's ironic that the methodology for pen testing is really for most pen testing, or probably more often red teaming companies these days, is modeled after a methodology that was in a movie that was published over 30 years ago. And I met one of the producers of that movie a couple months ago. The story for that movie was 10 years old, so it dates back more to the war games time frame. But you break into your company to find out all the ways that a company can be broken into. What a novel concept. I'm glad that it's a way that companies make money and people have a lot of fun doing it. But I regret my small role in setting that as a precedent, because
Why?
Because pen testing really shouldn't be a way to discover the vulnerabilities and the holes in your environment. Well, pen testing has become vulnerability discovery. It's like an enhanced Nessa scanner.
You're saying it should find the stuff you couldn't find, but it shouldn't.
It should find the test your foot couldn't find, and it's really a test of your defenses. I mean, 30 years ago, we were like, do you want us to try to break in? Do you want us to be noisy? Do you want us to be quiet? Do you want us to test your defenses, your detection capabilities, or do you just want us to get in? And of course, we'd start out in stealth mode. But then we would, the analogy I always made is, then we'd start banging the pots and pans and still nobody was detecting us. So, but every time we would do that, it was like, okay, clearly these guys were not ready for a pen test because they don't even see us.
Yeah. But I agree that there's two things there, Jeff, that you're hitting on. One is testing your defenses. The other is pointing out vulnerabilities or exposures.
Well, let's call them.
And they're two different.
And this was the discussion of our roundtable back with SCOTUS. What was that episode? Was that episode 500?
Yes.
My contention is people don't approach pen tests with any specific goal or objective other than, well, we have to do it to meet the compliance requirement. I always tell my clients, why don't you take advantage of the fact that you have to do a pen test to do something useful about it? You've just written a new application. You've just written a mobile application. Why don't we focus the pen test on that? There's nothing that says you can't. Don't think you have to have this generic network level. I mean, it does require a network level now, but try attacking from different vantage points. Be the trusted insider one time. Be a contractor. Be the cleaning lady. Be the HVAC company that's got a connection to your network. That's the Home Depot breach, by the way. But nobody does that. Nobody takes advantage of what can we do creatively to do a pen test that actually is going to have some meaning and some benefit. They just, it's just another thing we have to do.
Yeah, I don't think a pen test should do stuff like you're not on the latest patch level, and therefore we exploited it, and that was part of the pen test, right? Because there's so many great tools and processes that you can discover that stuff on your own today.
Well, and in PCI in particular, because there's vulnerability scans required too. How often do the pen tests discover a vulnerability that wasn't discoverable by the scan?
Exactly.
Not often, I would say.
Yeah.
Or the chaining together of medium and vulnerability.
Goes back to my thing. You just need to be really great at patching, right? But what I still come back to my tried and true example. Now I've dipped over time, but my tried and true example is we use RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol from Microsoft, and we don't see any security issues with that at all. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of vulnerabilities. There's risk in using that. Well, we don't believe you. All right. Well, let me sniff your password. And then now what the result of that should be is a change in behavior and process to shore up your defenses. And to me, that's the truest value of the penetration test.
But, 30 years ago, when arguably I would say it was easier to break into networks because a lot of the things back then that were features hadn't been patched or fixed or resolved, and especially configurations and utilities that came as part of the operating system type of stuff that we routinely exploited. I thought back then that if we said we were root, that the clients would understand, oh, that means you could do anything. But they didn't understand that.
You have to show them. That's the other value.
Well, and even showing them,
Wow.
the analogy of sticking the dog's nose in the pile of poop type of thing,
Right.
still doesn't work. In my experience, and maybe it works in some. What worked for the clients 30 years ago and most of my career in the private sector, they get breached. And then all of a sudden, oh, you mean that stuff that you were talking about that
That means
matters?
something?
That
Yeah,
means
it
something?
matters. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's do something about that.
Well, we'll debate that more on perhaps the next episode, because we didn't even talk about bug bounties, and I think Jeff signed him up to help work on the next generation of the P-Test project.
Oh, please, I would love to be involved with that.
There you go.
You're in. Both of you are, actually.
I insist.
Both of you are, because I need somebody for microcontrollers.
I can do that for sure. 100%.
I think we can manage that.
Yeah.
All right,
Awesome.
we'll talk
Well,
soon.
thanks everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul Security Weekly. We will see you next time. Over and out.